Did WWE drop yet another hint at the formation of the original Bloodline on this week's edition of WWE Raw? You know by now that it was Sami Zayn and Jey Uso teaming up in the main event, and not only did they do just that, they also won the match against the current tag team champions, Finn Balor and JD McDonagh. So you would think at some point in the near future, Sami and Jey are going to get their shots at the tag team titles on that brand. Of course, that's got to come after SummerSlam, you would think, because Sami has his hands full with Braun Breaker, who is now officially going to get that rematch with Sami at SummerSlam. And I've mentioned before, you can check out the Raw reaction video. I think this is where they're going to flip the belt to Breaker because it just makes a lot of sense, right? I don't think you're going to have Sami versus Breaker at Money in the Bank and then have it again and have Sami win. No, this is where Braun Breaker wins the belt, and then you get Sami out of the Intercontinental title picture, and now you get him into the tag team title picture. Because what does that do? Well, by getting Sami into the tag team title picture, you also get him back into the story of the Bloodline because of who he's teaming up with, right? This is Jey Uso. Sami was the one to save Jey from the attack backstage from Judgment Day. That led to this tag team match. You've seen kind of the same scenario. Go back to last October where Sami and Jey had a backstage interaction on Raw after it was Jey who happened to help Sami. Whenever he found himself in a bad spot against the Judgment Day, it was Jey being the one to help Sami, and that's where Sami got frustrated with Jey backstage because Sami said that he felt like Jey was the reason that Kevin Owens was no longer on the Raw brand. But we've come a long way now to where the tide has sort of flipped a little bit, and we know these two have been connected throughout the entire Bloodline story. One of the most appealing parts of the Bloodline saga, when there were the ebbs and flows, there were some dips certainly with that storyline, was still the interactions and the chemistry between Sami Zayn and Jey Uso. And so WWE is doing what? They're putting them back together, and I think what's significant about this is not just the fact that you're seeing these two reunite. Now, you're also seeing these two reunite and have a shot at the tag team titles, which you would expect they're going to have a great chance to win. Because why? Without spoiling anything, we also know that there is someone else in the current version of the Bloodline who could have an opportunity to get their own shots at a tag team title. We know that Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa are going to be part of the tape SmackDown, which if you want to find the spoilers, they're out there, on this week's edition of SmackDown, where they are going to compete with 5 other teams for the opportunity to get a shot at the tag team titles on that brand against DIY. So, what if we have this scenario where all of a sudden Sami Zayn and Jey Uso wind up being the tag team champions on the Raw brand, and then perhaps Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa wind up being the tag team champions on the SmackDown brand? Well, wouldn't that be kind of ironic, right? To have both of these in that discussion, and then all we do is wait for the return of Roman Reigns, which you guys know by now if you've watched the channel. You know that we are looking at the most likely scenario for Roman Reigns to return would be at SummerSlam, and that is coming up soon. And how does that play into the full story with Sami and Jey? Well, because you had Sami and Jey doing the 1D in their tag team match against Finn Balor and JD McDonagh. That's one little thing. You had Michael Cole adding in the fact that I wonder what Sami Zayn and Jey Uso think about what's going on with the Bloodline on SmackDown. You also go back to some of the things we've talked about previously. Jey Uso has done promos where he's talked about how he's been able to go out on his own and he had to get away from the Bloodline. Sami Zayn has done promos where he was talking to Alpha Academy about understanding that when he was with the Bloodline, he had to leave on his own terms. He understood why Otis, Maxine Dupree, Tozawa were not kind of, yet turning on Chad Gable, if you want to put it that way. Ultimately, they broke away from the group, and now you've got Gable going up against Otis and company. That's not really relative to this particular story, but it is because WWE has been putting this in motion for weeks and weeks now. When you have anyone mention the history with the Bloodline, Sami Zayn, Jey Uso, you know that it's all to lead back to the starting point, which is getting them back together. And how do they get there? Well, I don't think they're winning the tag team titles before we get to SummerSlam. That's going to come after SummerSlam. But you can re-enter them into this Bloodline story at SummerSlam. How do you do it? Well, as I mentioned, again, in the Roman Reigns video that I did, talking about what's the ideal scenario for booking his return at SummerSlam in Cleveland. I think we're going to look at this scenario here, and it seems like, one of the better choices, I would think, to how you want to get these guys back into it. Cody Rhodes could be all alone against Solo Sikoa, and you've got the Bloodline surrounding Solo. You've got Cody by himself. Randy Orton's been taken out. Kevin Owens has been taken out. And then what's Cody going to do when he finds himself in that situation? Perhaps Cody is able to triumph, right? He manages just for 3 seconds to get Solo's shoulders on the mat, and Cody retains. But the Bloodline will not take that lightly. They will then go after Cody, right? And then Cody's going to need some backup. And the most obvious choices for the backup now that they are paired back together, just like they were on this week's edition of Raw, is Sami Zayn and Jey Uso. Because they were, as I've mentioned previously, the two people who had Cody on their shoulders. After Cody defeated Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40, it was Sami Zayn and Jey Uso carrying Cody around the ring. And now this is the perfect way to connect them all back together. We know the friendship exists between the three. And now that you have Sami and Jey back on the same page, they're all back together. Now, if Cody finds himself in a spot where he's alone against the Bloodline, perhaps about to suffer the same fate that Randy Orton and Kevin Owens have, then you need some backup. And that could come in the form of Jey Uso and Sami Zayn. Now remember, we're wondering if Sami will have already lost the championship to Braun Breaker on that night. I think he will. And then you free him up, again, to get back into the story. And maybe that is how they do it. Get Jey and Sami coming out to try to make the save. For Cody, that's where you get the Roman Reigns return. And then we're looking at what? We're seeing all the pieces in place. Perhaps Jimmy also involved in this return. We don't, I don't have a full confidence on what's going to happen with Jimmy in terms of how they bring him back. But we know he's got to come back too. And then that gives you all the pieces in place, which kind of started on this week's edition of Raw with Sami and Jey now clearly going to form that tag team because now they are having a shot at getting the tag team titles. And so I think now you've got that set up. Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, Sami Zayn. On the other side, you've got Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, Tama Tonga, and Tonga Loa. We also know that out there is still the former Hikuleo in New Japan, who seemingly may come in as Tala Tonga based on the trademark we've heard about with WWE filing that several weeks ago. And so that is still out there. We don't know how that factors into a potential War Games match in November, but we do know that the pieces are starting to come back into place. And I think this is where things are starting to get exciting because, again, it's not just for any random reason. This seems pretty obvious, right? They put Sami and Jey back together. They get a win over the tag team champions. We know where this is headed. But as always, we don't know how they're going to fully execute it. We don't know how they're going to actually put everyone in motion, and we can visualize that moment and how awesome it would be. But there are still those little things that WWE is always able to bring out that make it that much better when you get these big moments that are going to happen. And we know SummerSlam is a great opportunity to pull out some of those big moments that should officially jumpstart the Bloodline Civil War, perhaps with the return of Roman Reigns. But now with Sami Zayn and Jey Uso connected back together, they've been leaving the breadcrumbs in the promos they've done leading to this. They did the 1D in the match. Michael Cole bringing up their history with the Bloodline. They're doing this all for a reason, and it's all connecting together. And I think it's going to be very entertaining to see how it all comes together. And again, maybe it's not as soon as SummerSlam for Sami and Jey. Maybe they don't find themselves right back into the mix as soon as that. Maybe Sami is too beaten down, right, from Braun Breaker. Maybe Jey, who knows, right? Like maybe Breaker gives Sami Zayn a stretcher job. It takes Sami out of the equation. Jey goes with Sami, and then you've got Cody all by himself. And then again, like we said, maybe somehow that relates to Roman Reigns' return. But there are a lot of ways you can do it. But we know now, if there was any doubt whatsoever, which I know a lot of you guys, there was no doubt anymore. It was very obvious that this is where we're headed towards the big blow-off War Games match. It's happening months from now. And clearly, the Sami Zayn and Jey Uso part of this equation is now coming together. And I think that is, again, one of the things we were waiting on, right? We were just waiting to see how are they going to bring them together. All it took was Judgment Day attacking Jey Uso, and they're back together. Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, and now likely headed towards the Tag Team Championships after SummerSlam, and also headed towards the reunion of the original Bloodline and what could be an unforgettable War Games match, one of the biggest matches WWE has done in a long time, perhaps. Given the story, it could be fantastic. So we'll see how we get there, but you guys let me know what you thought about Sami and Jey teaming up on this week's Raw. What else did you catch? Was from other hints that WWE dropped regarding everything. And again, you really can go back and look at the history. Like I said, you can go back to a random Raw last October where it was Jey saving Sami from the Judgment Day. Like, you can tie in all these different things. Obviously, Sami has subbed in before to help Jey, and be able to hold on to the tag team titles. Remember that happened, I don't remember exactly the year that. It all ties together, and I think that is what's very, again, exciting about where they're headed with the story. But we got even more forward movement this week on Raw, and it's only going to escalate from here when it comes to the original Bloodlines return in WWE. So again, guys, let me know what you thought about Sami and Jey teaming up. Where do you think the story heads next? Do we see them come out and make the save for Cody at SummerSlam? What happens? Give me your thoughts and predictions in the comments. Always appreciate your feedback. Be sure to subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out. Appreciate you guys bearing with me. As you can probably tell, my voice is a little bit, not great, a little bit under the weather, but want to get this video out for you guys. So appreciate you watching as always. Let me know your thoughts on what's next for Sami Zayn, Jey Uso, and the return of the original Bloodline.